Welcome back to the Luminous Education Revolution. I'm your host, Dr. Edith Ubuntu Chan. And welcome to this session titled New Earth Children, Bringing New Multidimensional Perspectives. As a community of conscious families, there's an interesting trend that many of us are seeing with our kids. We're noticing that they're highly intuitive, sensitive, awake, aware, and empathic. We're noticing that they exhibit unusual gifts and abilities that simply do not fit with the old paradigm and the old conventional school system. And they seem to see, sense, feel, and know things that are beyond the physical. While our kids will always act like kids, they also bring a potent and timeless wisdom that seem far beyond their physical age. The truth is, right now, humanity is going through a rapid evolution and awakening of consciousness. And in many ways, our kids are leading the charge. Some people call them the New Earth Children. You may have also heard terms like indigos, crystal, rainbows, star seeds, hybrids, etc. I like to simply call them the luminous kids. These kids exhibit an expanded consciousness and multidimensional awareness, which, if nurtured, they become powerful beings who can co-create our much-needed solutions as we build the more beautiful new earth together. To explore all of this, my guest today is the founder of Young Ascended Masters, Kaylaa Kayce. Amongst her many, many gifts, Kaylaa is an intuitive channel, a conscious parenting coach, and a multidimensional teacher. Originally, Kaylaa had a conventional background with a master's degree in education, and she's a licensed interventional specialist. For 15 years, she worked as a teacher and counselor for children with severe emotional and behavioral disabilities. While immersed in the 3D school system, her multidimensional abilities created an environment that allowed her students to release and transmute their discordant energy and return to health, wholeness, and well-being. In 2021, Kaylaa founded Young Ascended Masters to support and mentor spiritually gifted youth and their parents on this journey of expanded consciousness. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming the intuitive guide, the conscious parenting coach, the founder of Young Ascended Masters, Kaylaa Kayce.
Hi.
Welcome, Kaylaa.
Oh gosh, I love your introductions. It makes me feel like I should run in with my pom-poms and everything. Yay! Wow.
Yay! Thank you so much for making time. This is such a special topic and so near and dear to my heart, as you know. I'd love if we could get right into it and start the conversation with defining some terminology, because our audience is diverse. We come from different backgrounds with personal growth, spiritual growth. Some of us are into new agey things, but some of us come from different backgrounds with personal growth, spiritual growth, human potential, and biohacking. We have a very diverse background. A lot of us just are here because we love our children and we want to do a better job for our families and our communities. So it would be so helpful if we just ground this conversation with some basic terminology. We hear terms like indigos, crystals, rainbows, starseeds, hybrids, these terms. Could you please define these terms for us?
Absolutely. And the longer I talk about these kids in preparation for today, I'm realizing that languaging is almost a disadvantage, but we have to have something to talk about. So the essence of these kids themselves, just to kind of set that context, they're here bringing the perspective of unity. So even using labels to talk about them, some of them themselves even push back on that, talk about superpowers, spiritual gifts, multidimensional, all of that in its own sense separates them. So it's a challenge, 5 years down the road, having the same conversation. Who knows what it's going to be like? But while we're in this human suit, we still need to use language. So given that, we are talking about categories of kids only in the sense of what they represent vibrationally. And I guess to set a broader context, there's like four basic things that I've learned, four basic truths that I kind of guide conversation in my own life personally as well as the work. And that is, first, we're all spiritual beings having this physical experience. So that's pretty much a given. And these kids are aware of that aspect of themselves, where some of us takes a while to even awaken to the fact that we are spiritual beings.
Mhm.
Second thing is it's all about energy. And their greatest gifts and their greatest challenges is all around the energy that they're bringing and also interacting with. What I love the best is there are no coincidences. So if you're here listening to this conversation now, there's a reason, whether it's giving you some aha moments or just validating what you already know. And then finally, when you see it, you'll see it when you believe it. And that's kind of backwards from
Mm.
what we're used to. It's like, well, I'll believe it when I see it. Well, guess what? It doesn't work that way anymore. And so these kids are bringing that perspective to us. And the gentlemen and the people that are talking about the human potential, it's all being played out with these kids. So who are they? We talk about indigo children. Back in the 70s is believed when that was the largest flux of people. And if you look at society at the time, we were really in a stagnant energetic place. So these kids come in their multidimensional vibrational selves with the purpose of breaking up that stagnant energy for all of us, for
Mhm.
humanity, for the earth. Around the 90s, it's generally believed that what's called the crystal children started arriving. And these were, again, a different aspect. They have a different mission and purpose. But the larger perfect was to still raise the vibration. And vibration is just energy. Energy as information. It's opening our consciousnesses up. We started coming into our own spiritual gifts around these times in more numbers. The big shift in 2012 happened, and coincidentally or not, is when we say that the rainbow children start coming in. And each of these groups have something to teach us. We talk about how kids seem to be changing today. So these are the reasons that they don't look like we remember ourselves being, or the parenting experience itself. It's changing. So what I'd like to do is flip to a slide to give you kind of a visual idea of some of the different abilities and the gifts that these children have innately, because they have this higher vibrational multidimensional self. Just to back up, when we come to this human experience, we forget where we came from. The difference is these children are coming remembering.
Mm.
So in that remembrance is the greatest difference. We needed to be taught who we are. They remember they came from divine source, and they can have those innate knowings. The challenge comes for them when what they know innately is not what they see outside of themselves. So being in this world that looks like chaos and separation, and they know something differently within. And the challenge that we have as parents and educators is, how do we validate for them that truth? So
Well, I would beg to differ about we had to be taught. I think we chose to forget. I mean, I consciously remember as a child that I knew something was up with this place, and I saw energy and had guides and beings come visit. And I would just lay in bed at night and look at the ceiling and see beautiful multidimensional light shows. And when I told people about it, nobody else knew what I was talking about. So I was like, okay, well, I guess in this realm, they don't do that here. So I'll just shut it off until after 2012, all these gifts started accelerating and awakening. And 2013, a lot of things integrated for me. So it was like, maybe I probably was of the indigo generation that we agree to put on a veil temporarily until a time code gets unlocked later, where we're permitting ourselves to fully express these gifts again. And then with the help of these children, they're really like, wait, this is normal. Like what you guys were doing was like highly abnormal. And incoherent and doesn't make sense and out of integrity with truth. Like, what are you guys doing? So I think it's more we tolerated a lot of BS in previous generations, even though we knew in our hearts of hearts how this place worked was all backwards and upside down. We knew it, but these kids now, I'm noticing that they don't want to tolerate it.
Exactly. And they're not as easy to shut it down as we were. So what's awesome about being their parents and being the adults in this generation is they're here teaching us, they're triggering those memories that we had. And a lot of times it's generational. You know, they're going to find out, well, grandma was able to see energy. Maybe I didn't, but so it's all connected. And you're right, it's just this beautiful unfolding that we're all just playing that part in. So some of the gifts that maybe you even have, if I could share a screen with you, and from my work with these kids. So I use the term superpowers when I'm talking to the kids. A lot of them are younger. The innate abilities that they have, there's some pushback now to using the word superpowers because, again, it keeps them separate. Mm-hmm. So over the years, these are some of the characteristics. Literally, there's nothing on here that I haven't experienced with one of the children I work with. So I'll just go down this list really quickly. They see invisible beings. They hear and speak to them. They know beings are around them. They can communicate with people who've passed on, which is one of the early signs that we have that they have these abilities. They have memories and they come and talk to us, and we know that they haven't even been born when grandma was alive. How is this happening? They can communicate with animals, with nature. The other big thing is how they interplay with energy. So they can feel energy, some can see it. They have this innate ability to heal with their hands, through their minds. They don't be surprised if the child comes up to you and puts their hands on your knee saying, oh, how are you feeling? You know, I think there's something wrong with your knee. And the next thing you know, it's feeling better. 100% across the board, these children are empathic, which means they feel and absorb the energies of others and the energy of their environment around them. And that's one of the biggest areas that as parents and teachers, we could really work with them to manage that. It's one of the areas that they feel most uncertain or out of control with. Mm-hmm. Some see auras. If you really want to see if your child sees auras, have them draw a picture of your family and see if you get these little rainbow colors around their body, because they don't know they're seeing that. This is so innate. They don't know this is happening to them. So it's really kind of a fun, we play the role of detective for them sometime. They see the energy of people, little orbs of light. Some kids are coming into telepathic abilities where they sense and know people's thoughts. The one that I think is most important for parents and educators and politicians, they're going to find out the hard way, is they know when someone's not telling the truth because they feel someone's energy. When we're happy or sad or angry, they sense that. They may not have the conscious understanding of what they're sensing, but when they hear the words come out. So my mom often struggled with things and I'd see her look really upset. Mom, how are you? Oh, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And I knew it just wasn't right. And it, in a way, that damages our relationships. The more authentic we can be and honest we can be with our kids, it may not always be appropriate to share our adult worries and situations with them, but we can at least be honest in the moment. They know things they were never taught. They know things before they happen. Some talk about past lives, perhaps even living on other planets, have out-of-body experiences. They astral travel in their dreams, some even when they're awake. I think as a species and consciousness, being in two places at once one day will be something that won't have me fall out of my chair when I think about, wait, what? Talk about shape-shifting, telekinesis. We've even had workshops to teach. These things can be taught and developed. They might speak strange languages. Sometimes we hear the term light language. It's a language of the soul that kind of comes out as this gibberish tonality. Some are already channeling, doing automatic writing. And lately there's ways that we talk about bringing our energy into water, which we are 70% water ourselves. And they have this instinctual understanding that we can actually affect the consciousness of water. And some of these kids' missions, they actually know that they are here to assist with the pollution on the planet. What's so fabulous about these kids is many come with a knowing of why they're here and what they're going to contribute.
So beautiful. That's the ultimate superpower, that they come here knowing themselves fully. They come here not to learn things, but to teach and express these divine gifts. That's a big flip that I think we have to wrap our minds and hearts around, is that they already know who they are and they're just here to express it. We think that as teachers and educators, we need to like shove knowledge down their minds, and it's just the opposite.
It's our unlearning, truly. It's unprogramming the expectations we have of ourselves as these people in their lives. And everything that's being said in this conference about self-directed learning and really trusting their inner knowing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, question for you. If we don't use the term superpowers, what terms would you suggest?
Innate abilities.
Okay. Yeah.
That's probably the best. We could say spiritual abilities, but that in itself brings forth a connotation that isn't shared by everybody.
Right. Yeah.
Psychic abilities, so again, it's just starting to become more mainstream as we're being exposed to even various TV shows and, psychic kids and all that. I'm going to.
So my boy, I had shared with you off camera that my boy really doesn't like the term superpowers, and you're probably getting pushback from other kids too, because he's like, I don't like that term. I'm like, well, should I just call it powers? He's like, no, I don't even like that word. He's like, it's not super, it's not a power, it's just reggy. He knows the word regular, but as a younger kid at 4 and 5, he would say reggy. It's just reggy, like everything. And so he really didn't like for it to be segregated as something different. Like to him, his ability to read a book completely blindfolded is no more interesting or cool than learning how to swim or learning how to bike or learning to cook his first meal, and or being able to do math or grow veggies in the garden. Those are all just like fun parts of his experience. Why are some different than others? So that's probably the consciousness that these kids are bringing through. Is just like, this is normal, this is just a fuller expression of our innate abilities. So I like this term, innate abilities.
Yeah. Well, and that really, within the first year of my working with quote unquote conscious or awakened kids, was my most humbling learning. I would meet with these kids a couple times a month. We do remote meetings for community and spiritual development. And as it took me the first 58 years of my life to even recognize my own abilities that were always there, but just covered up, honestly, I had to put a lid on, like, you're the adult in the room, close your mouth and don't be in such awe. Because to me, as this older person, I've worked really hard, and I will say that it's felt like a hard work to heal a lifetime of experiences in order to have enough space to let the light in, to recognize myself as this divine being. And it's through that process of healing that we all go through just as human beings, or should I say, strive to recognize that we need to heal, that I didn't realize that I was holding them up as these quote unquote amazing kids here to change the world. Yes, they are, but they're kids. They're going through the human development because they agreed to come into this human suit to be our guides and teachers. And for me, an example, like a superpower of the past, seeing energy. And kids would talk about like actually seeing like a tear in the matrix, and beyond it is a bunch of spaceships. I mean, and they're like, what's going on here? And they're talking about it in this awe as I am hearing it. And the other girl's like, yeah, I see energy and it just is kind of blurry. She's trying to learn how to drive. So what I see is a superpower. Oh, I want to see energy too. That would be so cool in my spiritual life. Here, she's like, oh, I wish this wasn't happening because it's keeping me from getting my license.
Mm.
I can't keep focused on the road. So when I heard that, it's like, wait a minute, step back and really reevaluate again my perspective.
Mhm.
And what they're here to bring is this challenging of the perspectives that we have currently held our whole life or repressed.
Yeah, I think there's so much to unpack there with that little example with the kids learning to drive, but then they're seeing through the matrix as they're driving. Like that takes tremendous skill to navigate multidimensional realities. So we might romanticize it, but as parents and teachers of these children, there's work to do to support them in integrating and having a highly functional life so that they can do the work that they came here to do. So it's not all rainbows and unicorns and roses all day. There's and later I think you're going to share with us like both the gift and the intense challenge of the enormous amount of energies and informations that these kids are tapped into, which means like they could walk into Walmart and it's a very overwhelming experience, right? Like, so how do we support these kids in having a functional, beautiful, rich, and fulfilling experience of life, given that they have this much expanded perception abilities? That's what this conversation needs to be about, I think. It's like for a moment, we're like, wow, it's so cool. Like our kids have these abilities, but it's like, okay, now let's get to work supporting them properly.
Exactly. And it's navigating the world that they chose to come in as they're changing it. So one of the biggest things, like I said, they're empathic and they're affected. They have sensitivities. We need to be aware of just the physical sensitivities as well, the effects of food, the Wi-Fi. You mentioned Walmart. I love that. It's like my kid is always on track. We walk into Walmart and he has this meltdown and I don't know what to do and he's falling on the floor and he wants to leave and we all know it or we've seen it. And if we step back, hold that perspective that they are these higher vibrational beings, we're not going to say, oh, you're just misbehaving. Let's, talk about this later. It's like, wow, they're being inundated with these frequencies that they, one, aren't recognizing as frequencies. They don't know what's going on. I don't want to say that across the board. Our job as teachers, parents, to me, knowledge is power. And if the more self-knowledge they have, the more in control they're going to feel about their life and being in this life. For example, you talked so brilliantly on the various intelligences. And even as homeschool or self-directed, yes, we are familiar with emotional intelligences, but there's spiritual intelligence and energetic intelligence and just layers of practical self-knowledge. I worked with a mom and a 6-year-old remotely. That's challenging, but she came to me talking about just how highly energetic he is. He's seeing beings, he's having relatives come and he's being spooked by all of this stuff, and just how do we manage? He's not labeled ADHD, but he's got all the symptoms that we talked about. What can we do? So as I started interacting with him, I did talk about superpowers. Well, he was like, he identified with Spider-Man and showed me, didn't just talk about Spider-Man, because I'm thinking Spidey senses, and we can really connect at that child label or level and talk about some of these things that he's experiencing. And what it came down to was recognizing he had Marvel comic super characters. So what I want to put out to parents, if you ever heard of Magneto Man yourself, have you, where he just attracts all this metal and it just comes to him. To me, these empathic kids are like Magneto Man with feelings. So I took this little boy, and you can do this same activity if they're younger and it's still that playful maturity level. I took a bunch of sticky notes and I literally said, okay, so we've got anger and we've got sadness. And I just happen to have sticky notes here, and it's fun. So here's this little 6-year-old going, who's this crazy woman that I'm looking at with all these sticky notes? But it got the message across that, look, you attract feelings of other people. You might be mad. That's not even your mad. So how do we teach these kids to separate what is their own feelings from what they're picking up walking into a classroom or walking into their group of kids?
Yes.
So even energetically, we know energetic tools. We need to build their toolbox of self-care, energetic self-care. And so with this little child, we had sticky notes. So I had him stand up and, shake it all off, and some fell off. And then it's like, okay, so we're going to wipe it off. Now, literally, energetically, we can remove energetic showering, wiping off, meditating, how to keep it playful for these kids. And then finally, we did all of that. And I said, now picture yourself standing in the pouring down rain, and your feet are in the mud, and just feel it coming. If there's any leftover feelings, let it just wash down your toes. And until you feel the mud squishing between your toes, we're not done yet. So I asked him, I said, do you feel it? So I got his input, and he's doing this. And without him needing to know this, we're grounding. So we took all that energy and we grounded it. It was, again, it's not magic. It's what we know and what we can teach them. So we got done with that. I get the email from the mom. First thing he had him do was go out and buy sticky notes. And literally for the next few days, he was self-aware enough to know that he's feeling hyped. So he played that with the mom, with the sticky notes, and taught him. So it's techniques like that we can do with our kids. Talk about energetic bubbles, with bringing their own light out. One of the wonderful ways that I love to be playful with parents, and they can do with their kids, we need to teach where they end and where someone else begins. So when they're in this calm state, we could just sit and, okay, extend out about a foot. What does that feel like in your body? Go a little further. And then you do the same, mom or dad, about 5 feet away, and together play with this energy bubble. And it's like, where does it touch mine? Can you sense that? And then mom can okay, so I'm going to pretend I'm going to feel some anger or feel some sad, feel a feeling, and do that same exercise. It's a safe place, and have them become aware of, wow, I feel it. This is what it feels like in my body. And it's through those techniques that they're going to feel safer in this world. They're going to have some control over what can feel like emotional overwhelm to them.
Yeah, and I think most adults could really use these tools. I teach every Thursday night. It's called the Weekly Inner Reset, and we explore all these kinds of tools with adults. It's just like, people always talk about the school system doesn't cover important skills like financial intelligence, how to have good relationships, how to take care of your health. And it's not just, life is not just math and reading and writing and biology and history. There's like how to do life, this energy awareness, this intuitive awareness, this emotional and spiritual awareness. It's like maybe way more important than all the other schooly subjects. And so we're noticing that with all the adults that need this training to learn this kind of a toolkit, is really an expression of how deficient our old education was, because we realize we just need this just to do life. Be a well-balanced, healthy, happy human being requires this awareness. There's nothing woo-woo. It's just about like, how does life actually work? There's energy and there's emotions and all the, if we're not aware of energies, we're never going to be able to express our fullest human potential.
Yeah. And the other part, so there's energetic, there's emotional, but then there's the mental and the thought process. So I also like to teach the kids early, if we can get them before all of the self-critical talk starts happening, back to energy. Every thought we have is an energy. And I love the science that's starting with all the frequencies and the energies. And my analytical math mind, like, just, it's so nice to have evidence of what we innately already intuitively know. So having the ability to recognize when their thoughts, they can choose differently, learning that they have control over their thoughts and the energy that's put out, they can choose how they want to feel. Now, I've lived my life in this reactionary emotional mode, and going back to being a parent with this toolbox, our, in my mind, most important job or responsibility to best serve these kids, we really have to commit to doing our own inner work. These kids are going to trigger us. They're going to trigger all the programming that we went through. This new paradigm shift in education is coinciding with what they're calling us to be as parents. So the old paradigm of parenting is, I'm responsible for my kids. What they do is a reflection of me. Oh my gosh, that triggers everything in you about shame and guilt, and I'm not doing this parenting right, and they're not responding. Well, guess what? They're not here to respond to that. They're here to push against that. And that's why parenting can feel like such a challenge right now. So recognizing that that parenting program is only in our control to let go of, and realizing that we're not here responsible for how their life plays out. Now, that sounds kind of weird, but it's this co-creation of learning that you're speaking of as well. How can we help them become aware of their own innate knowing? And when perhaps the greatest thing we can do for them is to let them trip what we would expect them to behave in a certain way, allowing them to make a choice that maybe isn't the best choice that we see for them. And it's all in the communication. So instead of like, how do we discipline these kids? How do we consciously bring to their awareness their ability to choose differently? You know what? That didn't feel so good when I got into that argument with my friend. I kind of knew I didn't want to do that, but I did it anyway. Okay, so how can you do that differently? And what they're bringing, this new perspective, this higher elevated perspective. The old paradigm is we need to teach them right from wrong. It's our job to teach them right from wrong and be a moral human being. Well, guess what? They're on the track for doing that. Their inner compass, we can use words like inner compass. You can teach them words like the difference between head knowing and heart knowing. And that's how we can be of best assistance, is to support them in the self-awareness, guide them, but don't control that. Set the boundaries, encourage their curiosity and their wonderment.
Yeah, there's a ton of conversations in this journey that we're all taking together of going deep into the old paradigm, what it did to us, the rewards and punishment model, and the fear of making mistakes. Charles Eisenstein spoke really beautifully about rewards and punishments. Dr. Peter Gray spoke really beautifully about that. And of course, Dana Martin later about like the coercion and the judging and guilting and shaming our children versus unconditional love and allowing the children to naturally express themselves and then facilitating them in becoming aware of the consequences of their actions so that they can make self-empowered, wise choices. So Matthias Estefano said something really profound. That's a little bit later in the conference. He said that because we're not allowed to make mistakes, the paradox is that we keep making mistakes because we never learn. If we're not allowed to make mistakes, we keep making mistakes. And on a deeper level, at some point, we have like our whole society is lots of unwise, immature people running the place, making mistakes all the time. And because we were so programmed, let's be honest with ourselves, we were so programmed to be afraid of making mistakes that we even appoint a bunch of clowns to be our politicians so that we don't have to take personal responsibility, let's be honest, so that we can point at the clowns on the TV for making the mistakes for us. That was deep for me, you know, because we want to make fun of all the silliness with the politicians, but on a much deeper level, is us wanting to project our own fear and guilt and shame onto some other entity so that we don't really go do that deeper work. Like, hey, as a sovereign, self-empowered, responsible, fully developed and evolved human being, I would take responsibility. I'm not a victim of any of it. I'll take full personal responsibility for creating my reality, and I want to empower my children to learn how to make wise choices and take full personal responsibility for creating their reality. When everyone is self-empowered and centered and solid within themselves, now we can co-create a more beautiful world, right? So this is about teaching each other how to take full personal responsibility, that there's no victim here, there's no blaming here. We're all learning and growing and evolving ourselves, and we're stepping into a better and better and better version of ourselves all the time. But that requires us to feel safe to make mistakes, to learn and grow from our mistakes. We're missing out on so much opportunity to learn and grow because we don't permit each other to make mistakes.
Well, right. And back to those labels, as we are in a society that label the differences that these kids are expressing, how to help them recognize that their differences are these innate gifts. What's amazing about the idea that we're here to empower our kids, the more we can give them the knowledge of who they are, about the energy that's happening to them, they're going to be able to own it differently, to not take on that programming of self-judgment of I should be doing it a certain way. And I guess what I'm leading into is something I really want to share in regards to one of the greatest challenges that most of these kids are experiencing. I'm going to share a slide. So this slide, you can tell I'm a teacher. Mm-hmm. Forget the technology of the PowerPoint. It's so much simpler to really express this. So what this shows, when we speak of ourselves as energetic beings, we're constantly bringing in information. So this tube, this green tube, represents our physical body. It's got limitations. It's guided by the natural laws of being human. As we're accepting more energetic information in, the more healing we do, the more space we have to accept this light and this energy. But what comes in then bumps up against the physical limitations of our bodysuit, of our human suit. And those little squiggly lines is representing the vibration. So if you're on a spiritual journey and you recognize even the energies of the full moon, the energies of the solar flares, the energies of healing work and Reiki, it needs time to integrate into our physical bodies. And it can be really uncomfortable. We can end up with headaches or feeling like we have the flu for a couple of days after some really deep energetic work. We can get kind of moody or old patterns. It's like, I thought I dealt with that, and it keeps coming up, and it's coming up for a purpose to release and heal. So this picture gives us an idea of what these frequencies feel like. Now, if the kids have some understanding that sometimes an emotional meltdown might be because there's just energy that they're bringing in, it's like, okay, so let's use some tools to help manage that energy. One of my biggest aha moments is in regards to ADHD. and what we're labeling so many of these kids with. I myself included have lived with this quote unquote stigma of ADHD. So we're back to, what do we do when we're being labeled? How do we stop that programming from affecting kids the way it has us? So this is the reality of what's happening energetically to us every day, especially to our kids. When we're talking about someone who is showing signs of ADHD, the hyperactivity, the extra energy, what's happening is, now if you notice the slides, there's going to be a subtle difference. We have physical bodies, emotional bodies, mental bodies. In someone showing these traits, tendencies, they have an expansive mental body. So I represent, if you just know the before and after. So here's the tube. This is us. This is the average, even multidimensional child. Some are coming in with these expanded mental bodies, which means they can bring in more information, and their brains are like in overdrive. Things start working faster. The connections are quicker. They have greater curiosity and these craves to have more experiences. So as this is happening to our kids, it may look like the child that flits from one experience to another. They're interested in baseball 1 week and 2 weeks later they're on to something else, or they want to take piano lessons and then 2 weeks later they're on to something else. And it's not because they lack commitment, it's because they have this high speed of desiring experience. They have a thought, they act on it, it ignites their passion, it satisfies them, and they're on to the next thing. So if we take that child and perhaps you have an interrupter, okay, they're not rude. They're not like we need to teach them differently. Now, we do need to give them some knowledge about what's happening. But I challenge you, the next time you have your interrupter happening, pay attention to the conversation. And where's the conversation leading? Because what's happening for a lot of these kids is they hear what's being said, they've already made the connections, and whether telepathically or just from this active mind,
Yes.
they know where the conversation's going and they're done with it. So they're already answering a question that you haven't asked yet. And in our society, it comes across as rude. Now we again can teach them ways to live in a society that has limits. We're not asking them to conform, but we're asking them to understand. Now, there's accommodations. Well, the greatest point in this is what happens then is they go to school, or relatives start saying, you know what, you've got a hyperactive kid, you've got an ADHD, we need to do something here. So here's a kid that all of a sudden is getting the message that something's not right. So in school, that looks like we're going to put you on an IEP because you learn differently and you behave differently from the other kids. Sometimes we end up going to a doctor and all of a sudden the doctor says, you know what, we're going to put you on some medications so you act differently. And it's not that accommodations aren't really helpful for these kids. And yes, teachers through an IEP can be aware that they do have learning differences and they don't need to sit in their seat all the time. It's just not going to be helpful to work on worksheets all day long. So there's a place for it. Medication, there is a place for it. That's a different conversation. But it isn't helpful for the child to internalize the messages that there's something flawed. So while these pictures are pretty, and yes, it's interesting to have an understanding, what can we do to assist our child in recognizing this in themselves and finding ways to be more comfortable in their own skin? So what if this child who is now told that they're flawed and their brain isn't working correctly and we need this, that, and the other thing, if we took them aside and we say, guess what? You know what? Your brain does work differently. And as a matter of fact, it is working so fast and it is so creative and it is so powerful that the rest of us can't catch up. Our brains aren't where yours is yet. So what if you try this? What if you give us a chance to catch up to you? Which means some days you might need to slow your thoughts down. Or you might need to just take a deep breath and let that teacher have a word before we interrupt her, because they don't understand you the way I understand you. If we say this to our kids, it's no longer like a flaw. It is more like a superpower. I can't wait for my brain to work the same way yours does.
Yes.
Right now, and the difficulty then in that is, if you see this funnel, all that energy is being directed towards our physical body and our emotional body. So along with this hyper heightened mental state, when it gets to the physical body, it's not as expanded in many of us as we would like, or that we're working towards. So your child may start having, out of the blue, and this emotional explosion, this hauls off and hits his sibling, and moodiness. Physically, it comes out in that hyperactivity. They can't sit still. They can't, all the stuff that we see happening in these kids that we call hyperactive. It's coming into their physical and emotional body. And as parents, the trigger that happens is, why are you doing that? Why can't you behave? Why are you playing with your food? And you get the response that you just want to like jump out of your skin when you get is, I don't know. Well, guess what? Likely they don't know. They're not playing a game with you. There's no reason to get frustrated. How could they know that this is what's happening in them? And then this is where it's so important for us to educate them. Honey, this is what's happening to you. You're fine. Let's work on some tools to help manage this. And not only does it help us as a parent to empower them, it gives us a third tool to make it objective when they're showing behaviors. It's like, you know what? Could this be happening? Let's work on ways to get some of that energy out. So it kind of benefits in both directions. The more we can be in open communication with them and teach them.
This is so powerful. This is so in alignment with what Dana Martin shares about radical unschooling, which at the fundamental level is just about, instead of behavior modification parenting, is being curious to listening to the needs that is underlying the behavior and focusing on that. And what a more beautiful, peaceful world we'll have with everybody, not just our kids. If the way that we orient towards each other is we're not focused on the behavior, but allow the behaviors to just be symptoms of an underlying need that hasn't been addressed, and focus on that under deeper level. And then we can have such richer experiences of our relationships with everybody.
Yeah. And by letting go of what we expect this to look like, our own curiosity, we can take that step back and enter a more neutral, observing state, and let go of the judgment that is our journey as adults to do. Is, where are we judging? Where are we expecting? And as I was thinking about this, what if we could teach our children the difference between an intention, which is like holding the space for possibility, and an expectation. So my intention, for example, is to learn as much as I can in school, versus I expect myself to get all this and perform and whatever. We set the space, it's softer, and there's a power in that that is unlimited. So even using words like that with them is, what's your intention for the day? What would you like to do? What and it's even goal setting. Setting goals is really setting an intention. And there's no right or wrong way for it to work out. Let's be open. Let's be curious.
I've heard you speak really eloquently and beautifully about 5D parenting. What's your definition of 5D parenting?
So it's a model of co-creation, basically, where they're here to teach us, we're here to teach them.
Yeah.
And it's also an embracing of the fact that we all have our separate life journeys. So if we can trust that we're being guided, it's so hard to make that separation as a parent and allow the child to have their experiences without freaking out and needing to fix it for them. We can support them, we can guide them, but let's even say we've got the perfect environment. Everything is loving, the perfect environment. They still may have troubles because as a soul, they came here to have lessons to be learned. And perhaps the most difficult thing as a parent is if our child is here to really deal with some woundedness. My own experience, I had emotional crisis after emotional crisis. And as I shed that and healed from that, here I am now able to more step into my work with children who are dealing with emotional body issues. You know, our experiences. So letting them, back to your question about the parenting, trusting that the universe is guiding them, stepping out of the role to control, and know that by being unconditionally loving of them, being authentic ourselves, demonstrating the spiritual life through who we are, and teaching them to really nurture their own inner knowing. And I like to always add in there, we've got to be the keeper of their hope, because they are in this life. It's not uncommon for these children to go through an episode where everything they've known suddenly doesn't make sense. And especially as they reach those teenage years, they're going to experience that psychological individuation. Well, it's spiritual as well. Everything they've learned from you, mom. Okay, so here's the bad news. We can raise them to be these amazing spiritual beings. Somewhere around puberty and the teenage years, they may start pulling away from that, and they may reject your beliefs and their own gifts and their own knowing, because they need to figure out who it is for themselves. And they're going to start asking those questions. Well, is there a God? Well, my dear son, look what you came from. Well, how can you question that now? We have to like step back, not get scared, because they're entering those teenage years. They're entering a time of a spiritual quest. And this was most helpful for me to figure out my own life. And I'm going to just recommend the book real quickly without going into a lot of detail. It's called The Spiritual Child: The New Science of Parenting for Health and Lifelong Striving. And it's by Lisa Miller. She talks about how to develop the spiritual life. But the second half of the book is preparing us to allow teenagers to go through what she calls a developmental depression. When we ask these questions, we don't get answers. Well, who is God? What's my purpose? What's the meaning of life? And when we experience that dark void of not having answers, it gets really scary. So as a parent, know this is coming. To what degrees we definitely will observe and help them not funnel down into a deep hole of depression, but let them explore and let them pull back from what they've known. And it's part of the quest, it's part of the process. Please read that book. If nothing else, pick that book up for yourself. And it just is a parental godsend, no matter how old your child is.
Thank you for that. I've heard you speak also about, so that book talks about the spiritual child, and there's a lot to unpack there. By the way, you guys, Kaylaa has some amazing YouTube presentations. I'll put the links below this video so you can like really dive deeper into her work. But you've spoken in the past about the difference between a spiritual child and an awakened child. What exactly is the difference?
That's a good question. And even coming back to ourselves, a lot of times we might say that, well, I'm really spiritual, but I'm not religious. And I'm going to use that as an example to lead to the awakened versus spiritual. Religion has its place, and it allows for an understanding of God, but it tells us who God is. And it has some rules. You can be a spiritual person and not religious, in that you're exploring God for yourself. There are no rules, and it's always changing and it's ever evolving. So that spirituality is knowing that there's something higher than you, that it's not all this material world. awakened, for me, other speakers may speak of this as well, but that awakened is a shift in our consciousness to where, yes, there's a God and I'm living a spiritual path, but taking it within and knowing you are God, knowing you are divine, knowing you come from source. And in that inner truth, that inner knowing, we awaken to the fact that what's around us isn't always the truth. It's awakening to our own abilities that are looking unlike someone else's. We go from living as a spiritual person, living in this materialistic world where we're limited by our five senses. There's still separation and power. We can be spiritual and grounded in that, but we can be transformed and move into this oneness, this realization that life is beyond the five senses. There are spiritual beings. We are stepping outside of this environment of black and white, of power and competition. So it's really, and there's levels of awakening. It could just be this aha moment of, oh my gosh, there's more than this. Or it could be this journey of deepening to coming back to this self of remembering.
How I receive that is a greater degree of coherence and integration. Is this much deeper inner knowing that you are here to create your reality as an expression of the divine. Whereas the spiritual child, what I'm hearing is one that is aware of these possibilities, but is on a journey of seeking. The awakened one is more grounded and centered and coherent and just here to express these gifts now. And so I think back to what you said in the beginning, sometimes terminology limits us, but I think it's really a gradient, a progression, a journey that we're all going through, not just our kids, but adults, everybody across this planet to different degrees. We're all awakening and going orienting towards being a fuller expression of our divine essence in physical form.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And that first step is awareness. So awakening is really an increase of our awareness. And the clearer we can become of ourselves, of how we operate, of our energy, just everything that you're saying.
Wow. There's so much to unpack with you, but we're at the end of the hour. I would love to make sure everybody knows how to follow your work. You guys, I'll put the links to some really beautiful presentations that Kaylaa has done in the past, YouTube links that you guys can explore, but also your website, your offerings. Can you please share with us how you like to work with your families and kids and your website and all of that?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So my website is youngascendedmasters.com. Going there, one, you'll have a little bit of background deeper into the mission behind the work. I offer remote meetings twice a month, one to give these kids a community, and they're not here alone. And I do that with parents as well. So twice a month, I have meetings for kids. Twice a month, I have a support community for parents. We do that remotely. In addition to that kind of work, I am doing homeschool coaching. I do conscious parenting coaching. I've come back as this teacher who left mainstream community, my first year not teaching in the classroom, back to realizing the importance of learning. And the homeschooling and the unschooling mirrors the mission and who these kids are. Mm-hmm. So I do that. Some energy work. Inner child healing is just so important for us to be that expansive light for our kids. And that's how it all ties together. It's having the kids recognize who they are, as well as us coming to that fuller awakening state.
Beautiful. Okay. To tie up this multidimensional, beautiful, and inspiring conversation, I'd love if we could tie up this conversation with one final piece of advice. What do you feel like is the most important thing for us to keep in our hearts and minds on this journey of awakened parenthood or 5D parenthood and supporting our kids to blossom into their fullest possibilities in this life? What's the one most important thing you feel we should keep in our hearts?
Be authentic and be committed to loving you as much as you can. And that automatically is going to transfer over to your kids. And that's what they're looking for, is that role modeling. And I'm going to add too, just because I'm rebellious and probably an indigo myself, There are no coincidences. You're here. Let this be the moment that you believe that you're not doing this alone. Whether it's my groups as a support for you, Dr. Edith, this whole community, every presenter on this summit are now available to you in one way or another. So you're not alone. And that's the most important thing that parents need to believe, and take that breath and just be.
Oh, that makes me want to cry, because I think so many of us, especially the adults who are drawn to this conference, we've been almost feeling like we were carrying a burden, because we saw for decades now how this world has been built in such a strange way and is weird and backwards and upside down. And so we've stepped through a portal into new possibility now where we don't have to carry that burden. So I wish for so many of us to just let that go and just step into the joy of
And
this
that
new
gives me chills.
paradigm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that we were all quietly doing our inner work separately, and we went through so much deep healing and letting go of old traumas and giving ourselves the courage and the permission to step fuller and fuller into the gifts that we came here to express. Like we did so much work. So I wish to just congratulate all the parents for reaching this tipping point now that we're at, where we can weave all these threads of wisdoms and birth a much more beautiful new possibilities through our families and communities and our children. And let's celebrate.
Yeah.
Beautiful time to be alive right now. What a gift.
Your child chose you. You are in agreement with your child in this lifetime. You have all the resources you need for you to grow and for them to grow. And in your worst days, just remember, I chose this. I am enough. Thank you so much for this opportunity and this community that's growing. This body of work that is coming out of this. I am so excited. I mean, I've not been this excited to be involved in a project. It's just so important, and it's just going to take off. So,
thank you so much, Kaylaa. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for your generous heart. Thank you for all that you're doing for the community, for all these parents and children. Just so much gratitude for you.
Yeah, thank you too.